And welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. My name is Matt Delvecchio, specializing in life transitions, elder care planning, and the senior living industry.
And I'm Corey Sirota, clinical social worker and author of Someone Died, Now What?
And welcome back on this Father's Day weekend with a little bit of a cool weekend, right, Corey? But it's supposed to be a nice day tomorrow for the Formula One and a nice Father's Day for everyone. We want to wish everyone happy Father's Day again.
Absolutely. I echo that sentiment. Now I want to welcome everybody back to our segment on helping moms and dads. That's about supporting the sandwich generation with unique topics and dynamic guests. Today is no exception. Today, seeing that it's Father's Day weekend, we thought we would make it more about helping dads this segment today. So who better to ask than our very own Matt Delvecchio? What do we want to talk about this week, Matt?
Well, Corey, as the population ages, there's a host of challenges that we have to deal with, including health issues, financial matters, caregiving responsibilities. And we thought it'd be a good idea to address some of these challenges from a male perspective and offer some words of advice to help navigate some of those bumps in the road.
So there's no question that you are the best person to seek such sage advice because you're in it, you do it, and you're a male. It happens to work well all around. I know that you witness the challenges on a daily basis, and you are constantly being asked to provide guidance and support to families in elder care planning and life transitions. So I really thought it would be great to actually get your input on a couple of these matters. I have a lot of questions, Matt, so we better get started as soon as we can. Let me just give some statistics, though. Almost 1 in 4 Canadians are caregivers for a family member friend, and that role of caregiver can be extremely challenging, especially as one ages. So let me ask you something. Is it fair to say that it can be more difficult, true or false, for a male caregiver?
Well, yes, I'd have to say definitely. And I don't want this to come across as sexist, but really it is a generational challenge. Let's face it, men that are in their late 70s or their 80s or even their 90s that are in a caregiver role can absolutely find it challenging. Usually that generation, they were raised in an era where most of the time the husband was the breadwinner, right? And his wife and spouse raised the kids and took care of them, more of a caregiver role. And now all of a sudden, an elder male that is thrust into that role of caregiving can find it very difficult. I've even had some men apologize to me saying, listen, I just can't do it anymore. I'm not good in this role. And there's this guilt, but it's just the reality of that generation, and it's okay.
So I appreciate what you're saying because it is very important to validate their feelings, no question about it, and I have no doubt that you do that. So how would you even know, what are some of the warning signs that it might even be too much for someone to handle?
It's an excellent question because, let's face it, men tend to keep their feelings inside, not great communicators as guys, and it's more the attitude of I can do this. I could take care of my spouse or my wife, and but it is important to look for some of these warning signs. For example, if you see your dad or your loved one becoming more irritable and less patient, I would even say a warning sign would be forgetfulness. And I'm not talking about dementia here. I'm talking about simply that he is just physically exhausted. And you end up forgetting to pay bills or missing appointments. Mm-hmm. And if he is getting sick more than normal, it's typical caregiver stress, right? You tend to be getting a little bit more sick. And the old adage, right, with the oxygen mask on the airplane,
right,
you really do have to take care of yourself first.
That's the voice of Matt Delvecchio. You're listening to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Corey Sirota, and we are addressing some of the challenges that men in particular face throughout the aging process on this Father's Day weekend, and we're talking about caregiving. So what would you recommend to families on ways to improve the situation when they see and acknowledge that a male caregiver is struggling?
I think the most important thing you could do is try to communicate. And I agree, it's not always that easy. You want to ask some questions because the odds are that, dad or a grandfather won't proactively come out and say, this is too much, I can't do it. But there may be little cries for help. I'm tired. I'm finding it tough. Listen for those little cues and ask those questions. Well, I would also say look for some trigger events. For example, if there was a slip or a fall, either yourself or the person you're caregiving for, trying to get them in and out of a bed or bathtub. Those are trigger events. Others might be, hey, you know what? Our neighbor or our friend down the street is going through something similar. Here's how they handled this situation. Or even something like this. I heard this radio interview about caregiving, and it was hard on Dad, and use that as a trigger event. And I would also say, you know what? Sometimes it's just tough love. I've had adult daughters and adult sons just have that heart-to-heart with Dad and say, listen, we feel for you. All we're trying to do is help. Let's acknowledge that this is really tough on you, Dad. And just had a daughter the other day was in from out of town, was supposed to go back home yesterday and decided to delay her trip. And she gave Dad tough love. And, Dad's listening. And in a way, you see a bit of a safety net being thrown out there, and there was some relief.
That makes perfect sense to me. And so we're looking for the trigger events. We've identified them. What do you then suggest as resources that can help?
Yeah, there are quite a few resources. There are obviously family internal resources. Having those essential family conversations is what we're talking about. But above and beyond that, Corey, there are quite a few caregiver resources. And I'll just rattle off a few. I always like to start with l'appui, and that's a French word, but L'Appui. Corey, you've spoken to l'appui as on grief and bereavement. Did a great job there. L'appui is a bilingual website. Look them up. So many ideas, thoughts, articles on caregiving and support. You could also approach your local CLSC to try to get some help at home. Not always easy these days with the CLSC, but that resource is there. Some families choose to go to private caregiving agencies just to get a bit of a break, a few hours a day here and there. And there are several community resources. Corey, you've heard me talk about, I'm on the board of Nova West Island. They have wonderful home care resources. You've got the Alzheimer's Day Centers with the different organizations, including Nova. By the way, just sidebar on that, 2/3 of people with Alzheimer's are actually women. And so it's only projected that there will be more male caregivers simply because of that fact. And don't be afraid to get up online. Even ask your kids, is there anything on social media? You and I are both part of this wonderful resource on Facebook called West Island Support and Resources for Caregivers of the Elderly. Even though it starts with West Island, all of Montreal is using it. This is a wonderful resource started by Holly Stroll. We actually had Holly on our show.
Right.
And there is a ton of information on there as well.
So you're listening to Life Unrehearsed. That's Matt Del Vecchio, and he's talking about the challenges men in particular face on and their role when they find themselves as caregivers. We're going to head out to traffic soon, but I know you know this well, Matt. What about proper senior living communities? Is that a solution?
Well, it is. Let's face it, most people will try to stay at home for as long as you can. Nothing wrong with that. But there may be a point in time where it's just not sustainable anymore, either for mom, either for dad. And so, yes, a senior living community could be an option, and it could be an option in two scenarios. It could be in the case of, say, mom has dementia or Alzheimer's, and dad wants to stay at home but wants to be able to visit his wife on a regular basis. So there could be an option just for mom. But I often get a scenario where, look, if you've been married for 40, 50, 60 years, you want to stay together. So there are some wonderful communities that can put you in the position to be able to keep the couple together. Obviously, different care needs, some physical, some cognitive, but there are options. So if it is no longer sustainable, there is that possibility in senior living communities.
Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Corey Sirota with Matt Del Vecchio, and we are continuing our segment on helping moms and dads. And in the spirit of Father's Day weekend, we're focusing a little more on the helping dads perspective. We've been talking about some caregiving challenges for men with Matt Del Vecchio, and now we want to focus a little bit more on men's health and well-being. But first, we got to talk about senior living communities being a potential solution for male caregivers that are struggling at home, taking care of their spouse or partner. What about the situation where the man lives on his own? Let's say his wife's passed away. Rumor has it, Matt, you got to dispel this for us. Rumor has it that Single men are a hot commodity in seniors' residences. What say you?
I'm chuckling, but you bet. There's no doubt about it. The female to male ratios in retirement residences are quite high. It could be 3-1, 4-1. I've even seen 5-1. So men, yes, indeed, are quite popular in retirement homes. And it's so funny, I'm in there all the time, as you know, Corey. And when I go on tours, and if I have a single man with me going on tours, you should see some of the looks we get. It is so funny to watch that. And they're being discreet, of course, and we could clearly see. All right. In fact, I even went with a couple, okay, a man and a woman. They were married.
Right,
and we're walking by, and sure enough, I hear a voice in the background. He's got a wife.
And here you were thinking they were talking about you, right?
Yeah, no chance, Corey. Oh, but so funny. Yes, indeed, they are. Men are quite popular in retirement.
Okay, well, something, I guess, to stow away a little bit of information. There we go. Okay, thanks for dispelling that situation. Now, further to that, sometimes men do need a little push when it comes to looking after their own health. No question about it. So I remember we even had a specialist on about prostate cancer that was talking about this.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
It's very true. It's and part of the problem. Men sometimes need a little push when it comes to looking after their own health. There's a bit of this feeling of invincibility. It was very interesting when we interviewed the spokesperson for the prostate cancer and prostate health, where they said one of the key recommendations was to get your spouse involved and have your spouse speak up, particularly with prostate. It's very private and men might not want to talk about it. And he mentioned when we were talking, the wives and spouses played a crucial role in pushing their husbands or dads in take care of yourself. Sometimes they need that little push.
Well, it's interesting that in terms of widows versus widowers, I think I've mentioned this before as well, that 50% of men who become widowers are remarried or in a relationship within 2 years. And that's probably part of one of the things that they tremendously miss is the intimacy. And I'm not talking about only, I'm allowed to say sex, but just the connection. But also women tend to make sure that their partners are well taken care of, not exclusively, but it's something to know. So it is very, very important. I'm not shocked to hear that the health can deteriorate. So let me talk about the children. If someone is alone, is it true that adult daughters are supposed to, as opposed to adult sons, take on a greater caregiver role?
Well, I hate to generalize, but based on what I see and talk in my conversations and day-to-day dealings with families, it's true. I'm usually on the phone with the adult daughters first. Their brothers are also involved, but usually the lead role is that of the daughter playing the role of caregiver. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there are some amazing sons out there doing some heroic work. So I don't want to generalize in general, but it does happen to be that I'm usually talking with the adult daughters. But there are adult sons that maybe they don't have a sister. It's just the brothers or they're on their own, or they have siblings that are out of town and they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So I do see a combination, but yeah, the adult daughters are usually in that caregiver role.
So then, given all that we've talked about today, what are some really last-minute recommendations specifically? Well, for caregivers in general is always important because, like I said, it's partly it's gender, but partly it's temperament and relationships and personality. So what would some of the recommendations be specifically, though, for male caregivers? Yeah,
and so as I've discussed, communication is key. It's not easy sometimes to communicate. I always say, and sometimes they don't like me saying that, but you need to put the pride and ego aside. Corey, I can't tell you how many times where I've gone on visits with a male caregiver, a gentleman that is just doing his best, trying to take care of his wife, and you could see just the bags under of their eyes, and they're just beat up. And but the love I see from some people is incredible, and they won't give up. It's not even about giving up, but it is that pride thing. I could do it.
Right.
And you see that they're very much, men tend to be much more task oriented, and women tend to be much more emotional oriented. The guys tend to be a little less emotional. But if it's getting to a point where it's too much, you have to find a way to accept help and to be able to find solutions, to speak up. And sometimes it takes the family member. Sometimes it takes a daughter. Sometimes it takes your buddy to speak up.
Right, yes.
It's very important to speak up. Say, hey, you know what? Maybe you need a break. We're not saying you have to be separated from your wife. That's not a first step here. I'm just talking about maybe there's a way to help you out. Maybe you need a little bit of respite. These adult day centers are wonderful where, you could bring your wife or spouse for a few hours, give yourself a little downtime, go out, do your thing. So these are also very important, but sometimes it does take a push, particularly for males. You need to get that nudge and be accepted. Be acceptance to be able to say, yeah, you know what, maybe I can't do this all on my own.
Yeah, well, no man is an island. There's the expression came from somewhere. You have had so much experience with this kind of work and who you see and who you're helping navigate these transitions, for example. So are there, in the hesitancy that you might encounter, what are some of the maybe some of the statements that you would hear from someone?
Yeah, it's sometimes it's difficult to get the statements out. So sometimes, and that's where I go back to some of these trigger events. Try to, if you see someone, whether it's your dad, whether it's your grandfather, whether it's your family member, and you see that, you're not getting much out of them. They're very close-knit. But sometimes you'll get a little bit of a statement. Usually it's yeah, I'm a little tired. Or it's just a comment in reverse. You're looking a little tired. Everything okay? And oh yeah, it's fine. And then you start, if you're in the house, and you look for little things. Maybe the bed's not made they would normally make the bed. Things are a little disheveled, and maybe there's not enough food in the fridge that they would typically do. So always look for things like that. But I usually hear, I'm a little tired. I could do this though. And so that is one of the phrases we always look for, because the reality is they are tired. And so if they open up that little window to continue the conversation and let them know that there are resources and help out there, it's not permanently taking over, but just give that opportunity to say, hey, you know what, you can get a little bit of a hand. You need a break, Dad.
It's so right. It's so bang on what you're saying. I mean, you speak from your unbelievable experience in supporting families through this difficult time. So I want to thank you, Matt, for taking the time today, especially on Father's Day weekend, to share the words of advice that you did bring on. And I hope people are listening and you hear it well. Really appreciate that, what you shared with us.
I do appreciate it, Corey. And communicate. Don't be afraid to talk up. All right, Corey, what do we have next week on Life Unrehearsed?
Next week on Life Unrehearsed, meet a 22-year-old dynamo who makes pastries by day and designer cakes and cupcakes by night. We'll be talking to the founder of Pastry Plug, and we'll also talk about the growing popularity of elder care planners as our population ages.
Yeah, looking forward to that next week. Thank you for tuning in to Life Unrehearsed on this Father's Day weekend. And as a reminder, for all your inquiries or assistance with life transitions, elder care planning, and the senior living industry, it'd be my pleasure to help. Call me at Lianas Senior Transition Support, 514-622-8074. Look us up under Lianas Senior Transition Support. Many thanks to our technical producer, Jessica. You did a great job. Thank you so much. And you can listen to Life Unrehearsed here on CJD 800 every Saturday at 3 p.m.